There we go.
Hey, Justin, it's John Stadley.
Hey, John, welcome.
Thanks.
Hey. So just waiting for Ken and Chad. I suspect we'll see at least Ken, so maybe we'll give him more minutes. Or that being said, maybe we can get started with introductions, and by the time we're done, it'll be a couple minutes, and who we have will be who we have. So I am happy to walk us through, or Marshall as the vice chair, if you'd like to walk us through, happy to do either.
Why don't you go ahead and do it, and we'll just hope that Ken shows up. So.
Okay, sounds great. So again, this is the November Groundwater Advisory Committee meeting. Once again, we will be recording. So this will be available for the record up on YouTube. I guess just a quick reminder for John on the phone that *6 will toggle your mute on and off. And *9, if you want to kind of raise your virtual hand so the folks on the computer can see that you got something to say, you can use *9, or just feel free to jump in.
Okay.
And I guess real quick, I had issued the introductions last time, but I realized that as I went back and read or watched the video and listened to it, would have been good to have done that. So let's go around real quick. We'll start with the committee members, and I'll just call on you as I see on my screen. So just a quick who you are, who you represent, and we'll move on. So Marshall, you.
Marshall Gannett, committee member. I am representing sort of the hydrogeologist aspect of things.
Great. Scott?
Yeah, I'm Scott Kruger. I work with Benton County Public Health, and I'm representing the local public health.
Great. Phil? Sorry, Phil, we got you muted.
There we go. How's that?
Good.
All right, Phil Brown. Yeah, representing the hydrogeologic community, hydrogeologist.
And Susan. And I guess for folks on the computer too, if you hold down your space bar while you talk, that'll also unmute you. So that's another option. All right, Susan, we can't hear you. Oh, there.
You are in the meeting now. There are 13 participants in the meeting. You are muted. You can mute or unmute yourself by pressing *6. You have been added to the waiting room. You cannot talk or listen until the host admits you to the meeting. You are muted. You can mute or unmute yourself.
All right. How about we skip over to Mark? Susan, we'll come back to you.
Good morning. I learned a new trick. Press the space bar. Thanks, Justin. Groundwater irrigator, Harney Basin. That's the hat that I play in the Groundwater Advisory Committee. Thank you.
Great. John.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay. John Stadley, water well and monitor well driller, which is the role of I play on the committee.
Great. Susan. And we can hear you. You're good. Susan, can you hear us? Oh, maybe it's video. All right, Trent.
Yeah, I'm Trent Kastner. I'm with Cascade Drilling. I represent the monitoring well portion of Oregon. Well, for the monitoring well drillers.
Looks like Susan's going to be calling in on the phone, so wait for her to come in. All right, staff from Water Resources, Chris.
Good morning, everybody. Chris Bird, manager of the well construction and compliance section at Water Resources.
And Travis.
Yeah, my name's Travis Kelly. I am the new well construction program coordinator.
Raquel.
Yes, hello, Raquel Ramsier, policy manager for the department. Thank you.
Carlos. I think we got you on mute, Carlos.
Sorry, how's that? I'm Carlos. Good morning. I'll be co-hosting this morning.
And Deirdre.
Hi, I'm hosting this morning, Executive Support Specialist in the Director's Office.
And Susan, can you hear us?
You have been added to the waiting room. You can.
Uh-oh, there we go. All right, Susan, are you 5059?
Can you hear me now?
Yeah, gotcha.
All right.
All right, can you do a quick introduction, Susan?
Pardon me?
Can you introduce yourself real quick?
Yeah, I'm Susan Baker with Jackson County.
Thank you. Okay. Next item on the agenda is the approval of the minutes. It's too bad that Ken wasn't here. I know that he had some comments on making sure that comments of the committee got in there. I sent out this morning a second version of the meeting summary. And essentially what I did was I followed the process that we have instituted for the Water Resources Commission over the last couple meetings. And also this is a process that I sit on the Oregon Hanford Cleanup Board, and they've done something very similar in the last year. They've gone to this format of providing links to the recording at the various time stops. So, so essentially well, let me take a step back. Unfortunately, our June meeting was the first time we tried to live cast and do a video recording, and we got it running about halfway through the meeting. So the first half of the meeting, we've got a backup audio recording, but I don't have it up on the web yet. We're working on figuring out how to do that. But I've got examples in the minutes with links to the YouTube. And essentially I've called out the start of each agenda item with a presentation from staff. And then I've got another link to the start of the conversation, committee member comments, questions, answers. And I wanted to get folks' feedback to see if that is something that they like, something they'd like to see changes to. Anybody have strong feelings or any feelings one way or the other? Yeah, go ahead, Marshall.
I just wondered, since we're sort of launching into the agenda and sort of, the meeting's becoming official, getting onto official business, is there any need to hand it off to a committee member to run the meeting, or does it matter? If it doesn't, I would say continue, but if there's some reason why you need to have since I'm vice chair, I'm not looking for stuff to do, but if it would make things more proper for somebody to be running the meeting other than yourself, I'm happy to do it. But
Okay, I honestly don't know, but luckily our policy manager is on the line, and maybe she can chime in with whether it's fine for department staff to lead or not. Putting you on the spot, Raquel.
Thank you, Justin. I don't know that I've looked at that before. For the record, Raquel Rancier, policy manager. I would say that given that I haven't necessarily seen anything on that, I think it would be appropriate for Vice Chair Gannett to at least note that we're moving on to the next agenda item. And then I know that Justin is well prepared to lead you through that process. So I think that's probably appropriate, given that we don't necessarily have it right in front of us in our rule book as to whether or not that has to be the case. Thank you.
okay, then I'll go ahead and call the meeting to order. And I didn't print out the agenda, so I have to kind of toggle back and forth. So that's agenda item B. A, we've done introduction, so now we're on to approval of minutes. And Justin's already sort of explained the situation with Ken's comments on the set of minutes. As I recall from his email, he was concerned that there were some committee questions that were not reflected in the printed minutes. But do you feel that they've been addressed at this point? Is there reason to hold off on this until Ken can weigh in? What do you think?
We can also hold this till the end of the meeting too, as long as we've got a quorum. I know that Mark has to leave early. That would leave 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. That'd still leave 6 folks. So that's another option. So we can push this off till the end. I am happy to hear if anybody has comments or we can. Up to you guys, I guess. But I'd like to proceed.
Hey, Justin, Marshall, John, I think it's a great idea. Just put it off if Ken is going to be attending, and let him comment on what he was talking about.
Okay, that sounds good. And I haven't heard otherwise that he's not attending. So so let's just postpone. We can push that agenda item back.
Yeah, I concur in that if it's time for us to adjourn and Ken hasn't showed up, then we can decide there whether we want to pass him or not. But just for my edification, were the questions that he was referring to contained in the video part of the meeting that was captured?
No, unfortunately not. We do have them on audio, and I went back, listened to the tape, and we have that. We just need to figure out how to get it uploaded.
Okay, perfect, thanks. So at that point, at this point, then I would, that would bring us to agenda item D, the Klamath Basin groundwater update.
I think we should be on a legislative update.
Whoops, I'm looking at the absolutely wrong. I'm looking at the wrong ones. Hang on a second. Okay. Here we go. Legislative update. That would be the next agenda item with Raquel.
Good morning, Vice Chair Gannett and committee members. For the record, Raquel Rancier, Policy Manager with the Oregon Water Resources Department. Today, I'm going to be talking about where we are at really with our 2021 legislative concepts. As you all know, I think we've talked about this in prior meetings, that we are continuing to prepare for the 2021 session. I know it seems like it doesn't seem so far away now, but it did in the past. So before I get into our legislative concepts, I did want to just note briefly the process because it does relate in terms of the agency budget. So as a reminder, the agency submitted our agency request budget. That's the first step in the process. With our policy option packages, we submitted that over the summer, and it's now awaiting really with the second phase, which is the governor's recommended budget. And usually the governor's recommended budget is released in December. And that is really the starting point for the governor and the department and our conversations with the legislature about agency budgets. And ultimately, the legislature does make the final decision, typically in May or June. In regards to the legislative session, it is slated to begin January 19th. Sessions in odd-numbered years can last up to 160 days, with that making the constitutional sine die date of June 28th. With COVID-19, however, I think it is a little unclear at this point in time how the session will look this year. So for those of you that have been tuning into the legislative days, for example, those have all been virtual. And so we'll see how it goes. We're still waiting to hear the official word on what session will look like. Moving into our legislative concepts, WRD currently has 5 legislative concepts. And those LCs, I say currently we have 5 because those LCs must be approved by the governor's office before they will be filed. So if they're all approved, they'll be filed in December, and then bills are generally released in January. So any bills that have been filed would be released at that point. 3 of our bills I'm not going to talk much about today because they don't really pertain to groundwater. Those are transfers of stored water and extending the irrigation district pilot project, as well as hydroelectric fees. Certainly, if you have questions about those, I'm happy to answer them. We do have summaries on our website for all of our LCs, and Justin has a link that he can send out to the group if you all are interested in that. In addition, the 2 LCs that I'll talk about today are the water right transactions fees, which I'll talk about briefly, and then we'll get into, most of the time today will be spent on the well construction modernization legislative concept. So for the water right transactions and dam safety fees bill, essentially we're anticipating our increased costs for the next 4 years to be about 17.39%. And that's based on the estimates provided by the Department of Administrative Services. So as you all may know, we operate on a 4-year fee schedule. So the last time we passed this was in 2017. So we're up for our next 4 years here. I will note that since 2017, we did actually have to leave. Our current fee schedule is not actually covering all of the positions that we have budgeted. So we've had to leave positions vacant. And as a result of that, we do have in our agency request budget, it's package 070, I want to say, or 090, one of those 2. There's 8.83 FTE that are proposed to be eliminated as a result of revenue shortfalls. And this is, again, pertaining to water rates. Of that 8.83 FTE, our current fee schedule or our current bill would retain 2.5 of those FTE. So essentially this fee increase, as we've done in prior years, where we continue to have that goal of 50-50, so 50% fee revenues, 50% in general fund to cover the cost of the water rights staff. Essentially, if we're keeping that and then we're increasing it by our anticipated cost increases, there's still not going to be enough revenue for all of the positions. So I just wanted to touch on that one briefly. In addition, I'll also note that the department is proposing to add a fee for transfer applications in instances where someone wants to make a change for more than one well. So currently, we have that on the water rights side, but we don't have it on the transfer side. And so essentially it would add $410 for each additional point of appropriation included in the application. So that is the water rights transactions and dam safety fee bill. The next one is the one where I think this group will really want to spend a little bit more time on. So we've talked about this one in the past, and I'll note that based on the conversations we've had with some of our work group members, as well as with the Oregon Groundwater Association, we do anticipate that modernizing this program could be a multi-year phased effort. So there's a lot of work to be done, and I've certainly learned a lot about opportunities for modernizing this program in recent months here. So in 2020, about mid-2020, we did begin a work group to provide input on a proposal. We've only actually had one meeting due to our focus on budget issues resulting primarily from COVID, and then followed by wildfire recovery efforts. Both of those have really turned our attention to or at least away from being able to focus solely on our legislative concepts like we would like. So we are intending to pull together the work group again in December and January. The department has also met separately with the Oregon Groundwater Association, and further conversations with them are also needed. And really we're thinking through some of the ideas that they've proposed to us or that they've brought to our attention, and specifically looking at Nevada's demerit system, which I can talk more about if there's an interest there. There's also Oregon Building Codes has what's called the minor label program, and it's how they base, they do some inspections based on a certain structure that they've set up. And then DEQ has some different tools in terms of enforcement. And I bring those up because really, I think what we've seen as we've had these conversations is the mutual goal that we have is to have, for any future system that we develop, is to provide increased communication between licensees and the department, more timely correction of issues, and where warranted, more timely enforcement. And really our goal is to minimize the likelihood of well construction deficiencies in order to protect the public and the groundwater resources. So we're looking at, I'll transition into the bill now and where we're at currently with the bill. So we do have LC language, and in our conversations, this is a pretty comprehensive update. And as a result of that, we've noted that we really need to allow time for implementation. So I was able to actually get it into the LC that there would be, for many of the provisions, they wouldn't go into effect until July 1st, 2023. And this is really to allow for us to build the processes, the IT systems, the informational resources, and the rules that would be associated with such a comprehensive bill. A few of the provisions would take effect later, and this is in part to allow people to adjust to the changes, and these are really specific to electronic filing, for example, and also to ensure that we have these systems in place. This also includes the liability provisions that I'll talk about in a minute. So I do anticipate that there will be further changes and additional conversations about this legislative concept, particularly as we sort through what additional enforcement provisions we may want to include. And so stay tuned, it may change. So moving into what the bill does at this point in time. You've heard a lot about these, I think, in prior meetings. Some of them will sound familiar, some of them will sound a little different, and then there's a couple provisions that may be entirely new. So in terms of improving well constructor skills or ensuring that they have the skills necessary to properly construct wells, the bill would require evidence of welding skill to obtain a new license. and also allow the department to require an existing driller to provide proof of welding ability or undertake training if a deficiency is found. We also have in here that a licensee would be required to place seals on at least 2 wells in the presence of the department for license renewal. But it does allow the department to waive this requirement based on resources or the licensee's ability. And so that waiver provision, I think, is a little bit new based on some of the conversations where we've had discussions about, what's the department's resources, what if the individual is, we've consistently seen their abilities to actually place those seals properly. One area that we have not addressed currently in the bill, but as I've been doing more research, is we'll probably need to figure out how this applies to individuals or does not apply to individuals that are, so for example, we have quite a few people that have only submitted 1 well log over the past 2 years. So that's one example. Some have submitted 0. So there's still some items that we need to adjust, I think, related to that provision. In addition, for the next one, this is kind of under the umbrella of the accuracy of documentation and notification, really to allow for timely inspection. So I think we've talked about in the past, one of our greatest challenges is ensuring that we have the information that our well inspectors need in order to actually go out there and do timely inspections. And so this, the bill would, is currently written, would modify the required documentation to better track the well construction work across the state. It would require start cards to be submitted between 60 days to no later than 72 hours before work on wells begins. This is really trying to address the issue that we have where you can submit a start card really at any point in time, and it may be a year before you actually drill the well. That doesn't actually give us very good notice of when we should try to go out there and inspect the well. In addition, it does establish a start card expiration period. So again, focused on trying to ensure that we actually know what work is being done in the field. It does require drillers to provide the GPS location of the well. This is, again, trying to ensure that we know where to actually look for the well. We find a lot of errors in the information, or when it's just a quarter section, that can still be very difficult to find as well. It also includes a requirement to provide owner information, so that way we can actually contact the owner to get permission to be on site to do the inspection. And then also requires the driller to include the proposed construction timelines on the start cards. Again, to give us a better idea of when this work may occur. It does require electronic submission of start cards and well logs by 2024, unless that provision is waived. Some people have asked us, how we will be able to accommodate drillers that may have challenges with electronic submission. So we did put a waiver requirement in there that we would have the ability to do if needed. And in addition to extending that date out to 2024. It also requires drillers to provide notification to the department the day that work begins, and at that time to provide an estimate of the day on which they believe annular seal placement will occur. So again, that's trying to be able to provide us with the information so that we can get out on site and do inspections at the appropriate time, which in many cases, the best time for us to do an inspection is really at seal placement. The bill also includes, this one's new, it allows the department to apply to a court for an injunction if a person has engaged or is engaging in an activity that violates well construction laws. This was added as a means to try to address some of the concerns about how long our enforcement process takes. However, since then I've had some conversations with other licensing agencies, that have this authority, and they've stated that the provisions really are not used very frequently. So it is a tool, but there's other tools, I think particularly having a demerit system that we think will actually provide more improvements to the program, and facilitate, a relationship between the drillers and the department to really, raise the level of well construction work in the state. In addition, we also have provisions related to continuing education. So you may recall that the continuing education program sunsets in 2022. So this would extend that to 2030. And also it modifies the representation on the continuing education committee to include one person with expertise in groundwater quality, public health, or employee safety. And that was really because a member of the public raised the concern that the committee currently includes 3 members of the drilling community and then 1 member essentially currently of the department. And they wanted to make sure that there was the public interest included on there. We wanted to make sure that that individual had expertise, though, that would be valuable to understanding what credits to approve. And so instead of so we essentially made it so that they would have to have that expertise in one of those fields. It also provides that the fee for one continuing education credit for the department-sponsored courses shall not exceed $40, as opposed to saying that requiring that it be $40. And this is to allow us to be able to provide some courses that we may want to provide to everyone at a lower cost to ensure that everyone's getting the information they need in order to ensure that they are properly constructing wells across the state. The next one we have is well driller liability. This is one that we've been in conversations with the Oregon Groundwater Association for a couple years now. Part of the concern coming from the drilling community is that currently from the department's position is that a well driller is responsible for well construction deficiencies essentially for the life of their license. And the well drilling community, my understanding is they would like to see that shortened to 3 years. And that is based on, I think, Washington's requirements, as well as based on the time of their bond for a particular well. We've had a lot of conversations around this because given the current funding levels of our program and given all the challenges we have, as you can see by the changes that I previously discussed in terms of being able to ensure that wells are properly constructed, and given that we find about 10% deficiency rate on the wells we inspect, we've had concerns about that because it's really currently our only tool. So as you'll hear, we're trying to provide more tools in the toolbox. And so the department's proposal is that it would be 3 years liability if the department observed seal placement and reviewed the well log, and 10 years if we'd only reviewed the well log, and then 15, not to exceed 15 years if we didn't have the resources essentially to do either one of those things. So this would apply to well logs submitted on or after July 1st, 2024. Again, trying to allow us the time to get these other provisions in place. And then we also modified this one from the last time I think I talked to you all about it. We had more tiers in terms of review, but we're concerned about our ability to track all those different tiers and the different review levels. So ultimately, we would like to get to a 1-tier or 2-tier system, but currently this is the proposal that we've come up with that accounts for our current resources and tries to minimize the different tiers that we would need to track. All right, I know this is a lot. So I think the final one that final provision of the bill that I think is more exciting So it's not on the regulatory front, but I think we think it's needed. And this has been something we've wanted for a long time. And we've also modified it, I think, a little bit since I've chatted with you all the last time. And so this provision establishes the Water Well Abandonment Repair and Replacement Fund. And so it would establish a funding assistance program for the abandonment, repair, or replacement of wells with well construction deficiencies. So that's one of the provisions that can provide funding for. Two, it can provide funding to repair or replace wells used for household purposes by persons of lower or moderate income. This is trying to address some of the equity issues we've seen around domestic wells and challenges there with repairing and replacing wells to provide them with adequate drinking water. Three, the bill could provide for replacement of water wells used for household purposes in areas of declining groundwater where other sources of water for household purposes are not feasible. And then finally, we've left it so that it could address other water management challenges that we don't have included in the bill currently. So it could fund abandonment, repair, or replacement of wells is specified in rule by the Water Resources Commission to address other water management needs and purposes that may arise. So we've written it in a manner that's fairly broad to be able to address the equity issues. It could address the issues that we saw, in the Mosier area. I think it could address some of the concerns that we've seen coming out of the Harney Basin. Currently, as we've written it, in terms of funding, we could provide 75% of the cost to permanently abandon a well, 50% of the cost to substantially repair or replace a water well used for household purposes. And then if we are looking at, there's some other programs that we've seen across the state in regards to the septics legislation that was passed previously, and we've kind of modeled some of these provisions around that. So if there was a desire to have a third party establish a program, we could provide funding to support that. At this point in time, I will flag that our policy option package 107, it currently requests only $100,000 to get the program started. We know this is a difficult budget year, and our goal is really to get a program in place and then look for more funding options or more funding to be added to the program. Because of the small amount that we're asking for, we aren't asking for staff resources currently to administer the program. If we were to see a large capitalization of the program, we would then need to account for that. So I will pause there and see if there are any questions. I know that was a lot. I think this is an important piece of legislation, though, and I'm happy to report that we're at least working on modernization. And I know there's a lot for us to do, and there will be a lot more discussions that need to be had to make sure that this works for the drilling community, that it's protecting the public and the groundwater resources for future uses, as well as taking into account the department's limited resources.
Are there any questions for Raquel?
This is Phil. I did have one. When you were wrapping up and you described some of the places that this program, some of the issues that would help address, you mentioned Mosier, and I'm just kind of curious, would that be like in ensuring that the well construction issues didn't happen to begin with in the future, or was that like this gives you the flexibility and some funding to address some of those well construction issues? I'm just curious about which part of Mosier that might help.
Vice Chair Gannett and Committee Member Brown, thank you so much for that question, because I wasn't clear enough apparently. So what I was alluding to really is that the Mosier funding that we previously had, which I think you're all familiar with, the $1 million that the legislature provided, it was a one-off program that was specific funding for Mosier. And what I really meant is that if we had had something like this established, they would have been able to put funding into that program, and we would have been able to have, a program already established. So this is really, the way we've written it is that we could address, so let's say there are issues still within the Mosier area with wells that have well construction deficiencies. Because I know the $1 million did not cover all of them. This funding could be used towards that purpose based on how we've written the language. Does that provide a little more clarity?
Perfectly clear. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, before we move on, any other, and we're just a little bit, we're pretty much on schedule, but are there any other questions for Raquel before we move on?
Yeah, this is Scott Kruger from Benton County. I just wanted to know, Raquel, if we start from today and move forward, what is the department's ability to screen those well logs as they're coming in for construction standards and completeness?
Vice Chair Gannett and I can't see your last name, so Scott. I will say, I don't have offhand what percent we're doing currently. I will flag that Policy Option Package 107 requests 2 positions, which would allow us to essentially screen all of the well logs, is my understanding. Now, in terms of doing follow-up on those deficiencies, I don't think POP 107 provides all of the resources necessary. So we would need to think through that and whether we would have a goal of all of them being screened or whether we would have a smaller amount being screened and then ensuring that there's follow-up on deficiencies. So currently we do not have the bandwidth to be able to do 100% well log reviews. It is something we would like to see in the future and is incorporated into Policy Option Package 107.
Thank you.
Okay, unless there's any burning questions, maybe we could move on. But before we do, Mark, I understand you need to leave a little early, and I'm wondering if there are any of the agenda items that you'd like to see us address before you have to jet.
Thanks, Marshall. I appreciate that. And I do apologize for having to leave at 10. We have new legislator training. It's something that I cannot adjust to my schedule, and it was just scheduled. I always appreciate listening to Justin about the groundwater study in Harney County.
Yeah, so then if it's okay with everybody, I'm going to look at the agenda here real quick. The groundwater study update is agenda item I, and would everybody, well, first of all, Justin, would you be ready to discuss that now? And are there any objections if we move that up so Mark can take it in?
I am. I just want to note, I think Raquel also had a scheduling issue, and I can't remember when she needed to go. But if we skip over the wells and wildfires, I'm not sure how long she'll be able to stick around.
Vice Chair Gannett, my meeting got canceled, so I can stick around if you all just want to let me know when you need me.
Okay, unless there's any problems, then Justin, why don't you go ahead so Mark can get caught up on what's going on out there.
Okay, great.
So we're jumping from agenda item D to I, and then we'll circle back. Thanks, Justin.
Sounds great. Sure thing. Thank you, Marshall. And I, because I'm a host here, I can also say Ken has joined us. So just want to make everybody aware of that. So glad you can make it, Ken. And I will jump into the agenda item I.
Hey, Justin, I'm going to interrupt here just for a second and apologize. For some reason, I had this starting at 10, so I apologize. I'm late.
Oh, no worries. We held off on our discussion, just so you know, of the meeting minutes and the format, so we'll come back to that as well.
Oh, cool.
All right. So I'll start off with Harney, and I hope not to disappoint Mark too much. I don't have a ton noted that he's not already aware of. So we continue to work toward getting the study reports published. I can report that, so to review, we've got 2 planned reports coming out of the study that are kind of in publication. One we are calling the hydrology report, which is a description of the general groundwater hydrology of the basin, and then the water budget report is separate this time around. That's different from our past basin studies, with the Harney as a closed basin, and a lot of work that we did to try and nail down all the details of where all the components of the hydrologic cycle were and quantify those. That turned out to be its own report. The hydrology report has come back from USGS peer review, and the study team is currently addressing comments that were received from the study team. So that I think that after those are completed, the next step is that report goes to the Scientific Publishing Network, I believe it's called, of the USGS. So it gets in the queue for all the figures to be kind of unified in format by the drafters and the illustrators, and all the typesetting and formatting gets done. And from there we get a printable document. The water budget report is currently still out in the peer review process. So last I heard, we were actually expecting that back middle of this month. So should be relatively soon that we get the peer review comments back there, and the science team can start addressing any comments that they receive there. In the interim, the department has been putting together some work for the Harney Basin Water Collaborative that meets monthly. That's part of a place-based planning pilot that the department and the county initiated jointly in 2016 or 17, can't remember exactly. And recently we've had USGS folks from the study team, Steve Gingrich and Amanda Garcia. Well, Steve gave a presentation of the hydrology study findings and overview last month, and Amanda will be given an overview of the water budget tonight, actually. So if anybody's interested in the water budget, you can see Amanda give her presentation tonight about 4:30ish, and happy to forward those links if anybody's interested. Just let me know. Marshall.
Yeah, forward it to me.
Okay.
Sorry.
And that's where we stand on Harney. Anything else, Mark, you were hoping to hear or have to add?
No, I did have a question, if that's okay, Justin.
Yeah, sure.
So as most of you know that on this phone or this call or whatever we're calling it anymore, apologize, that the department had a groundwater study advisory committee in the county to work with the department and USGS on an educational learning experience as the study was going on. So that was a valuable experience. So this brings me to my comment, the peer-reviewed comments that are going to come out mid-month. I think that would be important for the community to understand how that interaction is going on. If there is any substantive comments or any comments at all, Justin, is there a way to inform the collaborative now that the SAC is not there so that we can work through that discussion or at least be apprised of how it's going?
I will need to check in. So my understanding is that I'll need to check in with the USGS on that, because my understanding is that those comments, the detailed comments, go straight to the authors, and we had talked earlier about getting a summary. So in some cases we get a summary of comments, which is a couple paragraphs of overall what the reviewer's impression was, as opposed to any text edits or what have you. So I will need to check in on that. I don't believe that the GS is in the habit of releasing the text edits themselves, and I don't know if Marshall has, from his experience, can clarify that. Or...
Yeah, there's certainly, and I don't recall the exact policies, but you basically summed it up right. I know the reviewers themselves, generally that's anonymous. These reviews can be really, really long and involved, but there is a way to transmit sort of the gist or major issues if there were any. So yeah, and I've never had to deal with that, but there is a mechanism, as I understand it, to let folks know kind of what the general findings of the review were. Like, yeah, this is a great report, or hey, if there were any serious issues with the science, then that would probably be that would definitely be included in that sort of a general summary of a review. So yeah, I don't work there anymore, so you'll have to follow through on that one.
No worries. And
yeah, does that help, Mark?
It does. I just think it'd be, finishing that conversation to build that community trust. Hopefully it shows there's no major issues. Move forward with the study. If it does highlight anything, just so our community knows that back and forth. I appreciate that.
I think I'm pretty sure they could accommodate that.
Cool. Marshall, the water budget is not good. Look forward to you joining the collaborative tonight. Maybe we can discuss later in the week.
Oh, okay. I thought, I'm just curious to what Amanda came up with, and it'd be interesting to see that.
So basically what it says is that what we're out of balance is pretty much the consumptive use that we're using in the basin. So I digress. Thank you for the opportunity to listen in. Marshall, thank you for putting this in order that I can make it.
Yeah.
So before you go, Mark, one other thing that impinges on the Harney a little bit is, so Ken had asked for an update on our activities with Klamath Basin groundwater. You'll recall last meeting we talked about, we had recently lost a lawsuit about regulating groundwater in favor of surface water in the upper basin. That lawsuit had pretty much directed, that the only way to regulate was through a critical groundwater area. So we were discussing a critical groundwater area in the Klamath. And at the time we thought that the Klamath was going to be the in line ahead of the Harney Basin. And as we look further into that, essentially for a number of reasons, first of all, our staff has been working significantly on surface water issues. So essentially, the water users in the irrigation districts down there, and Ken, I think, brought this up at the last meeting, have brought suit about regulating surface water, stored water, and what goes down and what goes down the river and what gets diverted to the project. So most of our work's been there. Secondly, I believe I mentioned this in June, but I'll restate that the statute for creating critical groundwater areas was changed in 1992 following the Stage Gulch and Butter Creek critical areas. And we're really taking a close look at how that new system is set up. We have not designated a critical groundwater area since those statutes changed. And we want to make sure that we have a plan in place to follow a process that hits on all our requirements. And right now it's appearing that the Harney Basin is much more organized to go through that process than we are in the Klamath. So that's my update on the Klamath. Ken, we honestly, groundwater wise, we haven't done much at all other than generally looking at the critical area rules. And again, we're feeling at this point that Harney is probably going to be the first basin that we walk through for putting in place a critical groundwater area. First one since '92.
Okay. Well, I'd heard some rumors and different things, and I was just curious about some of them. One of them that there was a possibility there was going to try to get some new legislation passed to get rid of how you classify a critical groundwater area.
I hadn't heard that, but that would be interesting.
Yeah.
So
okay.
We'll pay attention.
So I guess my other question would be, so you're not looking at, there wouldn't be no classification for even this next year on anything down here, correct?
So I don't know. We are, so again, in relation to managing surface water, we are looking at ways for us to do that. We're going to need to increase our measurement and monitoring. And we're looking at ways to, how are we going to get all the surface water diversions accounted for? And we have thought about a serious water management problem area designation, which basically is that's the name that's used in the statute, but essentially allows for requiring metering and reporting. And we're currently discussing whether we need surface water and groundwater at this point. Just surface water, we're in real early stages of that discussion, but I guess that's a possibility, and that would be a rule. And so that's the closest I can get to answering your question, is maybe.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you for the update.
Yep. Okay. Yep,
Justin, I got one question. How does this relate to the temporary rules that were passed a couple of years ago regarding, groundwater management in the primarily the upper basin, upper part of the, above the lake?
Sure.
Those I remember sunsetted and pending some permanent solution, but it sounds like that's sort of on hold now.
Yes, that's right. So those rules will sunset, I believe, in March. But that being said, we were challenged on those rules in court and lost, and so we did not enforce those rules this past irrigation season. So no groundwater regulation in the upper basin. And yes, that it was that lawsuit that said, if you wish to regulate groundwater in favor of surface water, you must use the critical groundwater area statutes. You cannot create a separate set of rules. So that Division 25, again, that was kind of a second iteration of that. And if you recall, the first iteration we put in place to codify our agreements under the Upper Klamath Basin Comprehensive Agreement. So we went through a couple iterations on that. And again, the very first part was what we had agreed to in the comprehensive agreement, and we put that into rule because we figured that we needed that was the public process to codify the negotiated settlement that came out of there. And yeah, essentially when the Upper Basin Comprehensive Agreement was terminated in 2018, the Division 25 said we would revert to Division 9. We did that for 1 year, and then we went and modified Division 25 to kind of move forward with regulation of a different set of wells, essentially. And now, of course, that is thrown out by the courts, and we're looking at a critical groundwater area as the next iteration, and that'll be likely a few years out.
But Justin, if I can ask, with them Division 25 rules, if I remember correctly, we kept the Upper Klamath Basin separate from the project. Are we still going to try to keep that the same way?
I really don't know, Ken. I can't. I just don't know. I mean, certainly the issues in the project area are different than the issues in the upper basin. And we'll need to take a look at that and how they relate. And and kind of what we think is needed and what's urgent and how big of a bite we want to tear off and chew on. So there will be a lot of considerations that go into that, and I can't say where it's going to end up.
Okay. And I guess my last question on that, so I guess the Division 25 rules are still supposed to expire here in March, or you're just going to go back to Division 9 rules at that point, or?
No. I mean, we won't, we didn't enforce the Division 25 rules this year. We won't go with Division 9 next year. Again, the reason we went with Division 9 is because the first iteration of Division 25 said if the upper basin agreement goes away, you'll use Division 9. So that's, we were again kind of following what the process was that we had laid out, but I don't believe we're going to be taking any action on groundwater in the near future. So I see Raquel has her hand up to add to that.
Yeah, thank you, Justin and committee. I would just note that while the Division 25 rules are no longer in effect coming up on in 2021, we will actually have to do a rulemaking to take the language out of the rules, if that makes any sense. So just note that that is something we'll have to do in practice. It's not in effect, once it says it's no longer in effect, but the language will still be there. And that's because to take it off the books, we have to actually do another rulemaking to repeal those out of the sections of law.
All right, any other questions on Klamath before I move on real briefly to the Walla Walla? Okay, and I'm sorry, I should have looked at what time it was when we started this so I could watch my time, but I'll I'll keep the Walla Walla relatively brief.
You're 3 minutes over, just so you know.
Oh my gosh, all right. So so we've continued to work on a scope for the study with the USGS, both the Oregon and Washington Water Science Centers and the Department of Ecology. So again, as a reminder, we're looking to initiate a study of the Walla Walla Basin, both sides of the Oregon-Washington border. We recently, 2 weeks ago, maybe got we've iterated on the scope a couple of times. We got a costed scope a couple weeks ago. Looking at the cost and looking at our budget projections, looking forward, we're going to need to work on either the scope or the schedule in order to make it fit within our budget. So what we're doing at the current point in time is Ecology and the Water Resources Department are looking at their budget projections and what we can afford. And next step is to get back together with the USGS in a couple of weeks here before Thanksgiving and talk about how we can adjust the scope to make it something that we can pay for over the next few years. In the interim, we had a pretty large public meeting on Zoom, had over 100 folks on the Zoom platform. It was run by Harmony Burright in our Water Resources Development Program. I thought it was really great given the circumstances. Unfortunate we couldn't have the standard town hall, but use the technology to have a couple breakout rooms, ask people, what questions do you really want addressed? What would provide you with trust in the final outcome? Got all those notes pulled together. Those are on our website. If folks are interested, I can forward links. But essentially, we had the GS give a couple of the GS folks came out and gave an overview on what is a basin study. And then, like I said, we had a couple hours of these breakout room small group conversations. I thought it went really well, and we're going to be incorporating the comments we received into the scope as well as into a public participation plan going forward. So
I'll back you up on that, Justin. I thought that was pretty well done. I was pretty impressed given, all the limitations of doing that remotely. I thought that was a well-run meeting.
Yeah, thank you. And yeah, I'll give credit to Harmony. She really pulled together everything and as always, anybody other than a group of hydrogeologists trying to hold a public meeting is probably going to be a much better meeting than than what folks might be used to. So so that's where we're at with Walla Walla. Oh, I guess one other thing I'll just note, we did in late August, had our first kind of large group joint data collection. So we did a seepage run where I think we had 7 individual groups out on various reaches of the Walla Walla River system, collecting streamflow measurements at more than a dozen locations to take a look at changes in flow at various reaches in the river to assess where the river was gaining flow that we could account for with, or that we couldn't account for with any tributaries or return flow. So that would be groundwater inflow, and reaches where it was losing flow, again, outside of diversions and what have you. So we had, again, folks from the USGS, from Ecology, from OWRD, Confederated Tribes of the Umatilla Indian Reservation, and the Walla Walla Basin Watershed Council, both also had staff that attended. So it was a really, really well organized, large group assessment. And I suspect we're going to do that once or twice more during the course of the study. But just to note, I guess we did have this, what we're calling a short scope in place to collect groundwater level data, to collect this streamflow data that'll all go into the study. So
you talked about needing, I'm sorry, this is Bill. Can I interrupt with a question? You talked about needing to evaluate scope and schedule to align that with budget. What is the current schedule for this study, or where do you think it's going to end up for completion? Do you know?
Right. So right now it's scheduled at 4 years. So essentially publishing in 2024, and that would be the conceptual model, including a water budget. And yeah. Yep. So now the goal is to take a look at all the detail and say, well, we need all the detail for our management objectives. Is it more important to get the detail and push the study out a year or two? Or is it more important to get an assessment out sooner that doesn't have perhaps all of the detail that we might wish we had in it? So that's where we sit now.
Are there any questions, any more questions for Justin before we move on to back to the agenda? Okay, then I will, we picked up a couple people since we did our introductions early in the meeting, Peggy Lynch and Mike Toma. Would you both be willing to just sort of introduce yourselves?
Sorry, I have to find my mute button. I'm doing 2 things at once. This is Peggy Lynch, League of Women Voters of Oregon. And frankly, thank you, Representative Owens, for changing the agenda around, because it certainly was one of the issues that I was interested in was the basin studies. The other one I'll be interested in is hearing about wildfires. And I certainly was interested in the legislative issue. Thank you.
Thanks for joining us.
Yeah.
How about you, Mike?
Yeah, hi. This is Mike Toma. I'm a hydrogeologist with the Water Resource Department. I work for Justin there. Just popping in, I'm interested to see Travis Kelly talk about kind of what he's working on, especially with how it relates to our collector and some of the new tools.
Okay, well, and just for the sake of completeness, Ken, you missed out our introductions. I think most of us know you, but since it's, this is being recorded, it might be good for the record if you just introduced yourself. And also, as chair, I'm happy to turn the meeting over to you, or I'm happy to continue running it, your choice.
Well, thank you, Marshall. And like I said, I apologize for being late. I'm Ken Maston. I'm part of the committee from down here in the Southern Oregon area. So, Marshall, I'm going to go ahead and let you run it because you started it. So.
Good enough. And you can just buy me a beer next time I'm down in the Klamath Basin, and we'll call it even.
Hey, you got it. But it might be a glass of wine, you know.
That's fine. Okay, so we're gonna get back to our agenda. We had the legislative update, and then we inserted agenda item I. So now we're on to agenda item E, wells and wildfires. So Raquel, if you want to take it away.
Good morning. Well, this will hopefully get you all back on track because we don't have a very long agenda item here. As you all know, the wildfires in Oregon this year were unprecedented and resulted in really significant impacts to Oregonians, with more than 4,000 homes lost. And this year has really been a learning moment for the department, I think, in regards to earlier in the year with the floods, then COVID, and then wildfires, and really the importance of being able to have continuity of operations, as well as understanding what happens when you have the scope and scale of a disaster such as the wildfires that we saw this year. So we really saw, particularly with the wildfires, there's a large-scale effort between local, state, and federal entities to coordinate on wildfire recovery. So the agency, in trying to assess our role and how we could be of service to Oregonians, we recognize that our services could be needed in 3 key areas. So the first one is dam safety, which I won't talk much about today. And then also within water rights, as well as well construction. And while we have sufficient information on the dam safety side to identify dams within the impacted areas, is, I think many of you know, particularly if you work within the groundwater community, is the precision of data for our water rights as well as well construction really pose more challenges. And as we were trying to figure out how we could be of service, we realized our best role at this point in time is providing information, not wanting to get in the way of recovery efforts, but really wanting to provide the tools and assistance that people may need as they go through the process of trying to rebuild. And so as a result, I did want to highlight for this group, we have created 2 handouts to assist well owners and water right holders following wildfire and recovery efforts. And one is pertaining to water rights, and it provides information on essentially, what you might need to consider when you're trying to restore water use under a water use that's authorized by a water right. So, for example, some water right holders may need to change their point of diversion. Some may decide that they don't want to rebuild at this point in time, but may want to preserve their water rights down the line. And others may need it for revegetation efforts. They may need a temporary authorization to do that work. So we prepared a handout related to that, and both of these handouts are on the front page of our website. The second one that we developed pertains to wells, and really as we were trying to sort through what all the impacts potentially could be and what really is a well owner one might need to consider, we came up with, I think, hopefully a fairly comprehensive handout. We looked at what some of the challenges were during some of the other wildfires, particularly that we'd seen in prior years in California, and the resources that they'd put together. And ultimately, you can find this handout online. If anyone takes a look at it and thinks there's items that are missing, we are in the learning phase. So I anticipate that we may do another update to the handout, either more in the near term or for future fires. But essentially, at a high level, to just the items that we're addressing for well owners to consider is, one, electrical hazards. So that's that one I don't always think about when we talk about wells, but there are some considerations that people need to think about in terms of not approaching a well if there are electrical hazards. Another one that I had not thought about was falling and drowning hazards posed by dug wells, and particularly if their lids have burned over and become weakened, or in some cases, dug wells that people may not be aware of are on their property, but are now exposed due to wildfires. We also have a section that covers damage to wells and associated water systems. We did receive some pictures, and I think some of our inspectors, as well as some of the people that have been out in the field with the ORWARN, for example, that are more involved in on the ground recovery efforts for small water systems. They shared with us some pictures of wells that had been damaged due to the wildfires. And really our suggestions here are to contact the licensed well constructor, you know, when they start to undertake that work to assess whether the well is damaged. We also found that potentially some of these wells, maybe if they had a well ID tag, they may no longer, it may have fallen off depending on how it was attached to the well. Of course, as we all know, that that well or that law went into effect in the 90s, and so not all wells have well ID tags. So we provide some information within the handout about that process if people want to better understand and tie their well to the well logs that the department has. We also covered briefly water treatment system damage and contaminants and testing. That is not really within our expertise. So really it's pointing them to the resources that the Oregon Health Authority has. The Oregon Health Authority, I'll note, we have been coordinating with them through these recovery efforts. They have received funding to do testing on private water systems, domestic wells. And so I know they are working on how that will be rolled out. We did also look and see what counties had done in California related to this. And it looks like initially they were testing for some of the VOCs and things like that. And over time, it looked like the more common issue that they saw was potentially E. coli, because they eventually removed their requirements for some of the other contaminants. But OHA will be administering that work. We have provided them with some information on our wells, but as we've noted, our well location data is not always very precise. And we don't necessarily have it associated with the addresses or the current landowner. In addition, we have provided information about abandoning wells and how to do that properly by contacting a licensed well constructor. And then one area where we are concerned about is wells potentially not being damaged due to the wildfires, but being damaged during the post-wildfire cleanup. If you've seen some of the pictures from the field, we have pictures of wells that are, you know, surrounded by debris, for example. And so we could anticipate that is being a potential issue down the line. We did provide that information to the debris recovery or the debris task force that's been undertaking work on some of the hazardous debris removal. And they had confirmed with us that they were attempting to, where they had identified wells, they were attempting to flag them so that way they would potentially not be damaged during that cleanup activity. And then we also, of course, provide information on what to do if you'd like to drill a new well, and then resources to find well constructors, as well as how to contact the department or Oregon Health Authority. So that's where we are at. And we tried to evaluate whether we could provide, you know, additional efforts, but at this point, with our current resources and with our current level of information, and given that landowners are dealing with a lot of different issues, we decided that our first step and our best step at this point in time was to be able to provide sources of information for these owners to be able to consider as they try to determine what next steps they need to take to recover from wildfire. So that's all I have for today. I don't know if there's any questions. I think maybe the other thing I would note is going back to our legislative concept that I talked about earlier in the different funding sources. We don't have currently a funding program. So Phil, this goes back to, I think, kind of the point that we were talking about with Mosier, but in a different light, is that because we don't have an existing funding program, we need to get authorization and authority for it. The emergency board can't just, come in necessarily and place that money in an existing program because no existing program exists. So the way we've actually written our legislative concept and the funding provisions in it is if there was a need to, such as wildfire, and we were seeing these damaged wells, that the legislature could provide funding to assist with the repair and replacement of those. So I anticipate that if that does get authorized in the 2021 session, that may be a continued conversation about how and whether to provide additional funding, maybe even in the light of providing it for fire recovery efforts.
Are there any questions for Raquel at this? Hey, this is just a general question for maybe anybody at OWRD. Did you guys lose many gauging stations in the fires? I think USGS lost something like 18 gauging stations.
Yes, Marshall, we did lose. We had some damage to a few. I don't have the numbers off the top of my head, but I know there was damage to a few, but I don't think it got into the teens, though.
Yeah. Well, regarding to your discussion on wells, it sounds like you guys are taking a pretty good approach. Just sit back and try to be more of a resource for folks than anything else. So sounds good. Any other questions? If not, we'll continue on through the agenda. I guess that brings us then to back to Justin for agenda item F, the GWAC membership candidates. You want to fill us in,
Yeah,
Justin?
sure. Just wanted to take just a few minutes and note that, so again, folks on the committee are serving 3-year terms. 3 of the 9 positions term out every year. So every November we go through a process of requesting interest, recruiting, and assessing any applications we get. So this year, Marshall, Scott, and John are all at the end of their terms. Marshall at the end of his first term, Scott and John at the end of their second. So the commission has in the past noted that they'd like to limit folks to 2 terms. So John and Scott want to recognize your guys' longstanding service, both been providing your input for 6 years. Really appreciate your time and your input. So first of all, thank you to you folks. And as far as applications for replacement, so Marshall agreed to serve a 2nd term. So we're recommending that the commission reappoint Marshall to fill John's position representing the drilling community. We are recommending that the commission appoint Floyd Sipple, is a well driller based in Salem, I believe, that is involved with OGWA and other community groups. And for our third slot, we had an applicant that we're going to recommend. Richard Smith is a domestic well owner. And as long as I've been doing this, we haven't had any domestic well representation. So we're excited to have the opportunity to recommend him for appointment. So those are the three folks that are on the slate. Those are available. They're little short bios if you're interested in learning more. Either I can fill you in, or it's in the agenda item staff report for the commission meeting on Thursday.
Okay, any questions or comments regarding the membership candidates?
Just, it's a minor point. Where does Richard Smith live, Justin?
Oh, yeah, sorry. So he lives, I guess, in the Beaverton area. I'm not sure exactly where. He's in the Cooper Bull Mountain critical groundwater area.
Okay.
On the south side of that critical area. So he, if you know where Baker Rock is, Grabhorn, yeah. He's about 2 miles south of the Grabhorn well. So
I happen to, yes. Okay. Thank you.
Yeah.
Hey, Marshall, John here. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, I just want to say to you, Justin, everybody else, it's been a pleasure serving on the committee. And I will somewhat miss having the voice in the committee. But I would like to add, if the commission approves Floyd, he'll be an awesome addition to the committee. He's got a lot of knowledge, been in the industry a long time, and has lots and lots of connections, and he'll be a great asset to the committee. And that's it. Thank you.
Thank you, John.
Good to hear.
We'll miss you, man.
Yeah, it's was a pleasure meeting both of you and being on the committee with both of you going off. So thank you for being part of it. Okay, so at this point, I guess we'll move on to the well inspection protocol review from Travis. Agenda item G.
Hey, good morning. This is Travis Kelly, Well Construction Program Coordinator. So I was asked to give a little recap on this meeting. So to summarize where this came from, we'd been having meetings with OGWA regarding our proposed legislative concepts. And out of those meetings, or the meeting, came some discussion regarding our current well inspection protocol, as well as some asks from OGWA on what we could do to improve it. So we had a separate meeting with myself, John Stadley, Kevin Gill, and Devin Sipple regarding where we're at with our current protocol. And so I have a little brief presentation of their asks, our current protocols, and then a draft protocol I created as a result of this conversation. So it was a really productive meeting, specifically for myself being new to this position. It was really helpful to get outside input from the drilling community on how we do well inspections in the field, as well as I think it was helpful for those people at WA to see that we did have a fair amount of protocols. It just wasn't transparent to the drilling community what our protocols were, since they don't have access to our internal documents. So hopefully my screen sharing is not horribly inconvenient for everyone. I always hope that I can do things and talk at the same time, but that is not necessarily true. Can everyone see my screen?
Yes, I can.
And hopefully you can't see yourself at the same time. So if that is the case, so anyways, I'm going to give you a brief summary. So this slide was a result of our meeting regarding our legislative concepts with what OGWA was looking for as improvements with our field inspections of wells being drilled. So kind of a summary of the well inspection program. We have 5 inspectors across the state. They're housed in our regional offices in Salem, Medford, Pendleton, Baker City, and Bend. and they cover those large geographic areas. We're tasked with inspecting a minimum of 30% of new wells. And as Raquel had mentioned in our legislative concepts, our current notification of well inspections for new wells is not consistent. It's just generic. So it's up to the driller on how they're going to notify us of when a well is being drilled. So when the inspector shows up to do the inspection, it's not consistent that the driller's there. And so that was kind of a lot of the conversations was we were trying to get at how do we get a better feel for what is going to be reviewed on site when an inspector is there while the well is being drilled or the driller's present. So this is kind of their ask, that they wanted more review of the rough log, the cuttings, observation of the seal being placed, more specific questions to the driller about their construction plan, and then asks on measurements for water level, depth of the borehole, those sort of things. So that was the ask. And then this slide is the status quo of a well inspection of that. We have done our inspections using this form on the left, which I assume is probably hard to see, but it's a very generic hand-filled form that lists many of our caveats that we're looking for. And then we have a protocol document that's in our, we have a internal field operations manual that guides staff on how they're supposed to do activities from well inspections to stream flow measurements, things along those lines. So our meeting with OGWA, we took their slide, these two slides, had a couple hour discussion on how to improve those processes. And it was very helpful, I think, on kind of having a back and forth conversation. So from that, I'm going to go to the last two slides that kind of then go through our new protocol that after I get final review from administration, this will go in our new version of our field operations manual that is slated to come out to the field in 2021. Our last meeting was canceled due to COVID. So I'm just going to go through these kind of line by line. So our new protocol going forward in 2021 is that all of our inspections are going to be done using a digital interface, using an application called Survey 123. That allows instantaneous archival of the inspection as well as review from anyone in the state of that document, as opposed to having a piece of paper in a well inspector's folder somewhere throughout the state. This is just going to go through a standard well inspection. When we start a well inspection, you get a notice that a well is being drilled, and that's called a start card. And so the process is you review the start card for all of the pertinent information, location, who's drilling it, where. That will then key you into that you should probably review the location the well is being drilled, as well as the driller's style of drilling wells, what type of drill machine they use, what is their standard protocol for seal material, cement or bentonite. Are they known to do things in a certain way? Those sort of just niche familiarization. If you're on site with the driller, then we have a much more specific, the original document just said ask questions. The new document then gives much more detailed asks on what those questions entail. What is your plan? How will it be implemented? What depths have you found water? How are you measuring the flow when you find that water? Do you know the total dissolved solids of the water you're drilling through? And then again, the driller is required to keep a rough log. So our new policy is to actually document that when you are having this conversation with the driller, that you'd actually photo document that, and that gets embedded in this digital inspection. Again, review the cuttings on site, comparing that to the rough log and what the driller has discussed. Checking their supply rig for all the equipment that would be necessary to construct the well to their plan. And then again, the generic check their license, depending on if you're familiar with the driller or it's near the biannual June 30th renewal date. something that's very important going forward and in the past is the GPS location of the well. And that's something I'm going to discuss in my next presentation about our digital format of we're transitioning to a standard GPS unit that we can then know and understand the horizontal error, so we can have an understanding of what the location is and its location accuracy. Check the well's cap to make sure it's watertight, meets our standards, ID tag on the well, casing height above ground surface required to be 1 foot, make measurements of the well, water level, depth. Again, encouraging all of the inspectors now have downhole cameras, so encouraging the documentation of wells using the camera. Surface seal, probing, augering it, making sure the casing centered, verifying there's not commingling water, which can be heard as the sound of waterfall out of the top of the casing, site map, photos, and then where the septic is, and then discussing with the landowner the dates the driller was on site. So that's kind of just the premise of our conversation, and something that we didn't touch on specifically was the technical well log review, but that was a part of our conversation. It just didn't have a lot of practicality into the driving force of tuning in our inspections to what the drillers were hoping to see as a more in-depth inspection. So again, there's my contact info if anybody wants to get a hold of me after the meeting, and we can open this segment up to questions at this point. And then I'll transition to the next one after that.
Any questions for Travis at this point?
Awesome. I bored you all to death. Everyone is bored. Good.
You nailed it. You nailed it.
Now my screens are all messed up, and I apologize for my screens being messed up. Let's see. There we go. Let's do a new share. There it is. Okay. So, okay. So as I was discussing, the legacy of the well inspection program has been to go and inspect a well with a field form, and then you take that field form back to the office and you manually enter this data into an inspection database. And so this database has decades of well inspections in it, but it is a very old program that is not very robust in providing on the spot analytics of our program. It also doesn't have many of the fields of where we're going with our program of, has the well report been reviewed? Did it have deficiencies? How are they addressed? Those sort of aspects. So I'm familiar with ArcGIS and some of their applications that they use. So specifically, we have transition, or we're in the process of transitioning to all well inspections being collected using this application called Survey 123. Starting in January, all of the well inspectors are going to be required to use this application to collect their well inspection data. The next step of that is that there will be an importer that should be rolled out in the next month or two that's going to be able to grab that data and import it into our database without any keystrokes from our inspector group. So that specifically eliminates transpositional errors in the latitude and longitude of the well that's collected by the survey, by the well inspector. And then it also houses all of the attachments and pictures associated with that survey with all of the manually entered data of the casing height, was the driller on site, all of that stuff. So it houses it all in one location. It's all available on Esri's cloud server. So it's creating a database that myself can access from anywhere in the state and see what the inspectors are doing on a given daily basis or over a large period of time. So if you're seeing this, all of these applications were created shortly after I started this program. So they're still in their beta form. I'm hoping to have a new inspection form out by January that's going to be taking a lot of the analytics from these and refining the process. So anyways, there's 3 apps that play with each other in this Esri suite of apps. So there's a form-based application called Survey 123 that allows you to tailor a document question by question on how, and this one specifically is a well inspection survey. So it has all of our paper form questions in a digital format that creates a geo point associated with the latitude and longitude from our GPS with our well inspection. And then that geo point can then be used in another application called Collector. That those geo points can then be manipulated by any of their fields to where you can call out wells on their type, monitoring well, dug well, water well, geothermal well, any of those caveats you've created in your form. Then you can then manipulate that data to show different things of when the well was drilled, any of those things in a spatial view across the state. And then there's another application called Dashboard, which is a place where you can then bring these data sets together to drive a map-based and an analytical-based view of these data, where you can show, I'm going to go through it, but it'll show you the wells across the state and who they were inspected by inspector's name. Specifically Survey 123, why did we switch to this? Again, it creates a digital archived format as opposed to paper forms and digital photos that are then spread across inspectors' desks and computers across the state that are inaccessible by the coordinator, myself, or anyone else in our management group. It automatically archives these inspections and their pictures. The records are queryable by any of the fields in the form. It also gives you analytics on the survey data you're getting, so you can see what questions are being answered, how they're being answered, and then it also, like I was saying, there's the form-based tabular data. It also has geo points that are spatial, and then so you can interact with your data in different ways. And then looking at if this legislation passes, where all start cards will be required to be submitted digitally with the GPS coordinate, I'm hoping that the notice to the inspectors can then become a visual reference of the state showing geo points of where the wells are, so that they can assign themselves daily tasks without having to open multiple screens to figure out how to drive to a well and then where they're going to go from there, so they can spend that time familiarizing themselves with the geologic setting, as well as who's drilling a well where and what their proposed seal depths are, so they can catch discrepancies and deficiencies ahead of time or during their inspections, as opposed to being retroactive of finding them after the fact. So I'm going to then go through, so this is my question slide. I'm going to go then show you this process in hopes of it being more interesting. Let's see, and I need to new share. Okay. So this is the Survey 123 well inspections format that we have right now. The first feature of this whole process is that all of the well inspectors have the same GPS device. We understand its horizontal error calculation, and it's well documented. So that source of GPS information is also embedded in the survey. So we can definitively say, how was the location collected and what is that horizontal error? So anyways, it's a pretty simple process. It's just like filling out our paper inspection. We would say who you are. It auto date stamps. You enter your start card. So we're just going to make one up. And we reviewed the well and we well report. So again, this is getting at that idea of that the inspector is then able to say, did I review the well report? What is its number? And was there a deficiency? Sorry. So then we say yes, and then we'll say that what would the deficiency be? Is it's short sealed. Anyways, so then you get to type what type of inspection it is, the purpose, and was it completed or attempted? So we completed our inspection, and then this field right here is maybe one of the most valuable ones of that it is able to tie the survey of the well inspection to the position of the GPS device. You can see that I'm at my wonderful house south of Portland. Here's the GPS accuracy, and then all of the photos that are taken with this application then have watermarks embedded in them that stamp the photo with the date, time, and GPS location that the photo was taken, again, to create a better documentation of saying that if there is a deficiency that goes to enforcement, that all of the documents are housed in this single location and they all have transparent information on them for anybody to review, saying, yes, this is that well at that location at that date, without having to look at the metadata associated with the file. So anyways, we're just gonna go down this whole thing, and then you type the well ID tag. No. So anyways, that's the gist of it. We'll just type test here, and then ideally this is gonna show up. So then I send this survey and it's submitting it to the cloud. And of course it wants me to sign in, so that would be good if I knew that one. These are always the glitches that show up when I know this login, don't I? Yeah, good. Okay, so we sent our survey. So then this is going to be really exciting because we'll get to see this data. So that's step one. We did the survey. Now we are going to look at it. There we go. That one. We want a new share. That one. So we went through the process of collecting the well inspection data using the Survey 123 application. This then, once you've submitted your data, it's all available on ArcGIS Online. So ArcGIS Online is a web-based application that is owned by Esri, the same manufacturer that makes the ArcGIS desktop version. And so you can set all of these, depending on what your comfort and familiarity with these things are, is you can set all of these as layers to show up in the full desktop suite through the ArcGIS Online suite. Again, that's something that just depends on how you want to use your data. But again, so we're in the ArcGIS Online Survey 123 application now, and this is where all of the well inspections that are completed this way are then housed here. And so we can see this first line is the well inspection that I just horribly showed you how to do. And you can see it's date stamped. For whatever reason, it says it's at 8:54 a.m. But that's neither here nor there. And that's so today's, it is today's date. But anyways, you can see that that's that inspection. So all of the inspections that we have conducted here are all available in this tabular view. They also have a geo point that's seen up here, and all of the photos are embedded with them. So this is the raw data that then can be manipulated through the other series of Esri apps to make it a more poignant or digestible view. One example is that I'm going to show you how these surveys are then displayed in another app called Collector. And all of these fields are then the same, but then you can restrict what is displayed and how it's displayed to be more conducive to your needs with your data sets. So again, this is the same data set, but viewed in the application called Collector. So this app takes the data from other Esri apps, and then you can manipulate its display. So I've changed the display to have the geopoints color coded to match the well inspectors' names or regions for that matter. And then you can then constrict how the symbology of each field, the number of digits for your GPS coordinates, showing start cards without commas, accuracy. And so it really constricts the amount of data that was in that other robust form that has every possible question answer in the survey to then ones that are more applicable to then using this data to then look at statistics statewide. So anyways, the power for this is that I can then see when there's a contentious scenario going on, or I want to know what's going on at a specific well that's having problems. As soon as the inspector uploads their inspection, I can then interact with their data. So here's just an example of a well that's being drilled out in the lake basin. It has all of the information about when when the inspector was there, and then immediately you can see pictures that have been uploaded to this site. So you can see that here's the drilling machine out in the beautiful lake basin, the accuracy of it, and when the inspector was there doing this inspection itself. So then if there is issues, we can then compile this into a document immediately for public records request or for an enforcement. Let's see. Okay, so that's that. And then the final aspect of this app suite that we're in the development phase of is now called this application called Dashboard, which then can pull data from the source apps that I was talking about, Survey 123 or Collector, and then you can. So the map on the right is the Collector map with color coding according to inspector name, which I can show you the statistics here, showing you who's been doing inspections, how many they've done, and then the corresponding color coding to their name. That can also play out to where you can then see the type of wells that are being drilled. And you can see here that our program is inherently new water well specific as our main focus, and you can then filter your results in your map view based on this analytic. So I want to see monitoring wells. So then this then creates a much more specific map to where I could say, okay, this is the well that had a deficiency. I need to follow up with this one, for example. There's many other aspects of this, and it's just something I've created for things that have been poignant to my workload. But the goal is to give our management and administration group tools to look at our program statewide and then see statistics or things they're interested in, or be able to get information instantaneously without having to ask myself or the inspector for that info. So again, these are just some more analytics of here's what deficiencies based on the inspector finding a deficiency on site. We're at like 9% of new wells inspected have deficiencies. Well report deficiencies are in that similar boat of when the inspector finds a deficiency, roughly 8% of them have deficiencies. And again, then you can then see the clusters of where they are to then get that specific data set you're looking at without necessarily having to query a start card number or a well driller license number. So that's kind of my digital inspections, and then where they've gone from there, and then kind of the future of where we're going of having a digital format that then is able to push the data into our existing database to give us better documentation without clerical or Scrivener errors on the inspector's behalf.
So is that it then, Travis?
That's all.
Okay, well that's really awesome. I love this stuff, and I'm a big fan of Esri. But I have a couple questions, and then I guess I'll take the liberty of asking mine, and then ask any other members of the committee. If I understood you correctly, you made reference to sort of uploading the data to your own system. But am I correct in assuming that this data, once it's in Esri's sort of server system, you do transfer the data in some form to your in-house servers? Is that correct?
Correct, and that's still in development right now. So right now it's just a literal band-aid of eliminating keystroke errors by having digitally collected GPS locations that then can be copied and pasted into the existing database until we can have a streamlined importer designed.
Right, but ultimately the goal is to have pretty much all the information in, say, tabular form, transferred over to your system.
Yeah.
Yeah.
The dream is to have a review screen where it's going to take Esri's cloud and then be able to import it into our SQL server, and
Gotcha.
you'll have like a review checkbox saying like import is the goal.
Right.
Because it's a real efficiency sort of thing for myself and the inspectors, of that if you do an inspection and follow the paper format, you are touching and interacting with your data set way too many times.
Yeah.
Where you should be focusing on reviewing well reports.
Are your field people all using tablets of some sort?
The primary way that these are done is using an iPhone.
Okay.
But it's compatible with iOS, Android, Windows. So any device you like, you can use. It's just the convenience of, we already have e-tapes and cameras, so the phone fits in your hand pretty well.
Cool. Okay. Do any other committee members have questions?
I got one, Travis, or a couple of them actually. So can anybody get on that site and look at these wells and all these things?
At this point, no. It is not a publicly shared site, and it goes to the line of start cards are confidential until the well report's submitted. It's in the orbit of this thing of having it be, and that's the goal, is to have a more transparent dialogue with the drilling community, specifically of what wells we've inspected, what ones have deficiencies, how do we get those addressed immediately so we can have more real-time conversations. Because right now it's like we find something months later, we send a letter to the driller, or it's years later. So that is definitely on the goal. I don't have a good answer on the public view of it yet, but it's definitely in that orbit.
Okay. And my second question is, like, the equipment that you check these holes out with, like the camera and stuff, can they go down a hole if there's already a pump in the hole?
Generally speaking, no, because the access port to the well is usually not large to put the camera through. And then it would depend on how the pump wires were either spider webbed or neatly wound.
Yeah. Well, I was kind of assuming that, but I knew some of this stuff was a lot smaller anymore.
Yeah.
So yeah. No, thank you. Very interesting.
Yeah, in my experience, Ken, you can put stuff down wells with pumps in them, but the trick is getting it back out.
I'm sure that's true.
And I see Bill's kind of laughing too. Anyway, okay, that's pretty cool, and it's great use of Esri's system. Any other questions? If not, I think
this is Scott Kruger. I have one question for Travis.
Yes. Yeah. Great.
So Travis, I've been using Art Collector for probably about 3 to 4 years now, using my Apple or my iPhone. And I've been out there collecting public water system data, and I'm wondering about, and I don't know how many of my county partners are using that. when I'm doing a water system survey, we're required to what I lovingly call a stick drawing, which it's a schematic drawing so I've been supplementing with my own project maps, and I'm not just identifying key components, but also identifying the wells and putting in the coordinate points on my map to supplement my schematic drawing. And I'm wondering about, interfacing with your program so that if you do have county partners that are out there collecting that data, that it might be available to you all.
That is a great point, and I don't have the bandwidth to consume more data or create more data, but I see that as a viable future, because these form, like Survey 123 is a mirror image of Collector. And so by sharing our data sets, we could easily have access to each other's data. I just don't know what we would do with it other than be able to reference it. So I know that whatever, by creating this thing, I've been, I'm not a GIS analyst. I am a conspicuous GIS consumer. It's like Oregon IPAs. I don't make a very good one, but I could tell you which one's the best.
Yeah.
So it's much of that. That's the power of the program, and the downfall is that you can make your own survey and create large data sets, but I don't know how we could get to that mutual goal in a streamlined manner. I know that OHA, Drinking Water Service, I've talked to some of their geologists about how I was able to use Survey 123 to create my own system within my own skill set. And so they're looking at that with modernizing how your guys' inspections are done, because it's included in the state's license for ESRI. So there's zero cost for the application use is the main benefit I see, is that it's free.
Right.
So yes is the answer. How we get there, I don't know. And I would love to continue the conversation on how we can tighten up the mutual positional accuracy and information tied to wellheads, because that's a pitfall of our database.
I think the part that might be the most beneficial is, especially over the last 45 days, I've had several wells that came up positive for fecal contamination, and and subsequently making a well evaluation request to my hydrogeologist, which ultimately ends up in an old well that's improperly constructed. And so that from a public health perspective, I think that's probably the most important data to share, would be that.
Yeah, and so to that exact point, we could make a very simple survey that says E. coli positive, fecal coliform positive well, and it would just be like 5 questions, like where is it located, who's the landowner, does it have a well tag, does it have a well report, GPS coordinate.
Right.
And so and we could easily share that. So I will make a note, and I will try to follow up with you on that note, because I definitely get those requests from the Drinking Water Service of saying, hey, this well's positive for this contaminant. Can you review its well report? I don't think it meets construction standards. And then we go down that avenue of forcing a repair or replacement.
Right. Well, I was laughing when you were giving your presentation, because I think from a field staff perspective, from a management perspective, that's great data to have. From a field staff perspective, it's kind of, it almost feels like having a tracker on my car, so to speak, but good data nonetheless,
Yeah.
It's interesting. That's what you shared was pretty amazing. So thank you.
Yeah, and this is just one guy, and I've had this job since April 1st. So I've been working from home ever since. So it's just one guy in his bedroom saying, how do I coordinate a statewide program? I know how to do this, so let's try this.
Well, pretty impressive. Thank
I'm
you.
up for any comments or criticism, because it helps me dramatically. So thank you.
Hey, Travis, this is John here. Mine's just a comment, not a question. I'm extremely impressed and and very happy you're in that job. I think the whole inspection program is benefiting tremendously from what you're doing, and which in turn the resource is going to benefit. I see the whole inspection program going to a whole new level, and I'm super encouraged by it.
Oh, thank you.
I think you're muted there, Marshall.
Hey, since Marshall is muted, I might jump in real quick. This is Mike Toma. I work with Travis. I just want to say, I guess, kind of getting to what Scott was saying. One of the issues I know that we have with incorporating other people's data is kind of the metadata, like who collected the data, where, when, what's the accuracy, what's the source, what the tools. And so one thing that's exciting about Art Collector, and like Travis was saying, getting everybody to use it is then like everybody's kind of using the same program to collect data. So like a well location, if we're all using the same technology, we kind of have a lot better sense of what the metadata is behind that. And so it's easier to kind of incorporate everybody's location, into a different system. So I think that's one thing I know Travis kind of mentioned that, but getting more people, even within the agency, but also in other agencies, to use the same or really similar tools is really helpful for collaboration.
Thanks, Mike. Now that I'm not muted, are there any other questions for Travis? Or the next agenda item is public comment, but I guess I would. Well, why don't we just go on to that unless anybody has any objections? And then after we do that, I guess I would ask if there are any other questions for the presenters, Justin, Raquel, if she's still here, which she isn't, it looks like, or Travis. But so the agenda item A is sort of a public comment period, and probably an opportunity to ask any questions as well. Are there any members of the public or other people attending online or via Zoom that have any questions, or via phone or via Zoom? Okay, nothing heard. Any other questions for Justin or Travis?
Well, this is Scott Kruger. I'd just like to make a last comment before we're closing out for the day. I just wanted to say what a privilege it was to be able to serve on this committee for those 2 terms. It was probably one of the more enlightening committees that I've been on, as far as, serving with obviously some of the smartest groundwater people in the state, and as well as just learning legislative processes and how everything unfolds. I think if the public really knew what goes into purveying groundwater, they'd be surprised. I was actually fairly blown away about how much goes on in the background in groundwater in our state. So I just wanted to say again, thank you for giving me the opportunity to be on the committee. It was my pleasure to be there.
Yeah, well, I can only speak for myself, but Scott, it's been a pleasure serving with you here for at least the last 3 years of my first term, and you'll be missed. You were always pretty engaged and had a lot to contribute, so appreciate it.
Thank you.
Unless there's anything else, I think we've worked our way through the agenda, and we could probably adjourn. We're about 40 minutes longer than, we're about 10 minutes longer than the schedule. Go ahead, Justin.
Yeah, sorry, I just want to bring us back to the meeting notes. So we had put that off till the end when we had Ken here. So you're frozen, Marshall. Oh, there we go.
Yeah, well, you were frozen for me. I think I'm going to turn off my video because it helps, I think. So Ken, before you were here, we skipped over approving the minutes from the last meeting because I know you had emailed some questions to Justin and he got back to you. And I wanted to make sure that you had an opportunity to weigh in as to whether or not you were satisfied with his response to your concerns about the minutes before we move to approve.
Well, I think my biggest concern with the minutes is I think, and I read that ORS thing you sent, Justin, that it can be either on tape or wrote down on paper. My personal opinion is I don't think it should be both. I think it should be one or the other. And so that's my personal biggest jest with it is I think it should be one or the other instead of using both methods.
Okay, well, I guess, so I guess I'd ask how you feel about this second version that I think I should be screen sharing now so you can see an example of it. So essentially in this written version, I'm basically using it to line out the agenda items and point specifically to links of where, if you're interested in a particular item, I've got links to where that agenda item starts on the tape, and then I've got another link to where the committee comments and discussion starts for each item. And I guess in addition to that, we captured, and I would propose we do capture any motions and votes, since that's specific. But essentially, I wanted to use the video for I think the statute says the substance of any topic discussed. So I figure the actual discussion can talk for itself there, but for the other items required to keep a concise written record, I would propose that we have this, what I've got up on my screen here that I'm sharing, this brief statement of what the agenda items are, where they are on the tape, and links to how you can get to them. Do you consider that too much repetition, I guess, is the question? Does that sound reasonable to you?
I mean, I think it sounds reasonable, and I think it's more specific on where everything is, but it does show that that where everything is, and I think that's important. So yeah, I'm actually good with that.
Okay.
Okay, well, thanks. Yeah, for my part, I kind of always appreciate the written minutes, but having been a secretary of committees before, trying to capture everything is really hard and really difficult in knowing what, not only just what you're writing down, but also then, what you're going to, report out in the minutes. So I think having kind of a pretty concise but complete written log of kind of what transpired, coupled with any kind of transcripts is an effective way to do it, Justin. So are there any other comments on the minutes? Then I guess we could entertain a notion to approve them.
I'll motion to approve.
Okay, we've had a motion to approve. Is there a second?
A second.
Okay, then all those in favor?
Aye.
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 Anybody opposed? Then I would say the motion carried, and I didn't see who seconded. So
I think that was John.
Okay, great, thank you. Okay, well then I think our business is completed. Unless there's anything else for the good of the order, I would propose we adjourn the meeting. So I'll turn my video back on just so you can see my smiling face one last time. Anyway, so meeting's adjourned. Thank you, everybody. It was good, and we'll see y'all next time.
Thank you.
All right.
Thank you.
Hey,
for everybody's
Justin.
time. Yes.
I had a question for you, if it's all right, if I can ask you something real quick.